I'm really excited about this theme, great Buddhist teachers. It's like, it's the kind of thing that's like a kid's storybook. You know, you open a storybook and it's full of pictures and amazing magicians and teachers and amazing nuns and female bodhisattvas who fly through the air and all that kind of thing. We have a treasure trove of tradition in our movement, and this series is going to celebrate that and dive a bit more deeply into that. The teachers that we have are here. So this is called the Tree of Refuge and Respect, and it has the Buddha at the centre of it, and it's a meditation visual depiction of our lineage and the inspiration of our lineage that came down to us through Sanghagita. So there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. There's the Buddha here, there's Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, there's enlightened members of the Buddhist community, there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The Bodhisattvas here, there's teachers of the present, teachers of the past. All the Dharma texts are here. And when we meditate on this image, we can imagine the blessings raining down on us from the past. And it feels a bit kind of echoey or something. How's that? Yeah, okay, fantastic. But as far as there's a 10 years worth of Sangha night series in this tree of refuge and respect. But we are particularly focusing on the teachers that are on here. The teachers of that we're not there are teachers on the refuge tree, and we are not in their tradition. They have a whole tradition of their own, but there are teachings that they have given in their own traditions that we can really benefit from, and that's what we're going to do in this series. We're going to look at individual teachers and see what it is about their life and their inspiration that we can take into our practice, and that's the idea. The particular emphasis can be helpful, even though Triratna has its own emphasis, which of course is very helpful. We can learn something from the teachers of the past and the teachers of the present. So this is if you're interested in this, it's usually hanging up in the green room. So thanks, Sean, for that. And so I didn't point him out, but he's up there. He's on the left-hand side of the teachers at the top there. And the teacher that we're going to start off with is a teacher called Milarepa. And Vedanya thinks that Milarepa is he is the one that every Buddhist should know. If you don't know anybody else on the refuge tree, on this tree here, then Milarepa is the one that we need to know about. Lou's made the shrine all in green, and she's put you've sat down again. See what? She's made it all in green because there was a story that Milarepa used to. All he ate was nettles for a really long time, and he turned green because of the nettles that he ate. And so whether that's true or not, we don't know. But it sounds quite likely. My kids turned orange when they were little because they had too many carrots. So when they were babies, so I don't see why not. He shouldn't turn green. So if you want to hold the picture up. So Milarepa, his story illustrates something for us. There are so many things that we could take from the story of Milarepa. You know, you could have a year's worth of retreats just on Milarepa. So many ways into learning about his life and his inspiration. But one particular thing we're going to look at is how his life and his practice illustrates the need for understanding how commitment is an important aspect of our practice. How practice won't always be easy or pleasant, And we need to be prepared for when that happens. You can see that he has his hand to his ear like that. And as the tradition is that indicates that he's a singer. So Milarepa sang beautiful songs of joy and inspiration. And he lived in the caves. He lived in a cave high in the mountains of Tibet. And he wore nothing but a thin white cotton robe, if even that, right through whatever the weather was doing. And Milarepa, his name, meant one who dresses in white. He got that later. He got that name later on. Thank you. Earlier on, his name was Milarepa, he who is a joy to listen to. So somehow his parents who gave him that name knew that he would, maybe that was a thing that they had a sense of, that he would be a joy to listen to. Milarepa became a famous poet, the poet of the Buddhist tradition, a very famous poet, and he sang his joyful songs, and he's handed down those joyful songs of Dharma to us. And here we are in Sheffield in 2024, talking about a man who lived when the Normans were invading England in medieval times. So his songs he sang about nature, animals, insects, birds, rocks, water, trees were all his friends. And he lived in nature and he sang his joy. He was born into a prosperous landowning family in a village in Tibet in about 1050. And when he was 7, tragedy struck his family and his father fell ill and was dying. And they were quite well off, so they got in the best doctors, the best shamans, even the best magicians that they could find to try and make him better, but nothing worked. And as he lay dying, his father became more and more worried about his wife and his family, what on earth they were going to do with the land and the estate when he died. So he asked his sister and her husband to come and see him on his deathbed. And he made a really serious request to them. You know, making a request of your family on your deathbed has quite a big, that's quite a big thing to do. And he made this very serious request to his sister and her husband. His children were young, and his wife, there's no way she could have looked after the farm and the estate. So he begged them, he made a very serious request of them to look after his estate, to take a share in the wealth of the estate. He asked them to make him a solemn promise that they would look after his wife and look after his children as if they were their own. And when their son came of age, to help him to assume responsibility for the farm and the estate. And they immediately said a wholehearted yes, of course. They made that solemn promise that that's what they would do when he died, which was going to be imminent. But secretly, they were absolutely delighted and had absolutely no intention of keeping the promise. They kept up appearances while the father was alive, but when he died, they immediately began to show their true colours. And they kept all the income from the family, from the farm. It was as if the promise had never been made. And Milarepa and his mother and sister were forced into being servants for the family, eventually into slavery and treated with terrible violence. They were treated worse than the animals were treated on the farm. And this went on for years and years and years. And there was absolutely nothing they could do. They were powerless. The Milarepa and his mum went to the villagers and asked the villagers for support. Would they come and help them? Would they at least help them to have a conversation about what the promise that they'd made? But nobody would risk the displeasure of the powerful family which they had become, and none of the villagers would help them. So this slavery and ill treatment went on for years and years. And as we can imagine, it wasn't a given. We can imagine the mother and understand how she became more and more bitter and more resentful of what had happened to her, and she became filled with hate and ill will for the uncle and the aunt, and for the villagers who had completely abandoned them to their fate. And she started to plan her revenge. She knew that the only chance she could have of having any power would be through her son, Milarepa. And she had an idea that he could be trained. She knew he was talented. She could see that he was bright and clever and talented. And she knew that he could be trained. And she wanted him to be trained in evil magic. So she had some savings. She had stashed away some gold coins. She'd buried them on the land, and she went and got them out. And she sent him to someone she'd heard tell of in a far-off land, an evil magician that could train him so that she could have her revenge. And she was sad to see him go. She was sad to let go of her only son, who she loved dearly. And he was sad too. But he took the money and went to find the magician, told him what he wanted. He wanted to be trained in the evil arts of magic, and he agreed. He took the money and agreed. The master could immediately see that he was gifted in the dark arts, and he very quickly mastered the principles of evil magic. He had an incredibly focused awareness, and it wasn't very long before he was able to cast spells. And his meditation became so concentrated that he was able to contact evil energy and evil spirits. And so one day, the evil magician gave him a particular initiation. He gave him the initiation of it's a bit of a strange one, but the evil spirit with the purple face. He did that initiation, and he became so concentrated that he was not just visualizing him, he was in the presence of this very powerful evil deity. So then he told his magician teacher the real reason for his becoming an apprentice, that he wanted to wreak revenge on his uncle and his aunt. So he wanted that power, and the evil magician was delighted with this. He said, yes, you can definitely have that. This powerful practice of Jar with the purple face will be just the thing you need. Meditate on him with his death-dealing mantra, and this is a very, very powerful high initiation and practice. So he gave it to him, and he sent him off to meditate on him. And one dark night, Jar with the purple black face was right in front of him. You've been calling on me, he said. You've been calling on me. Do you really want my power? Do you really want it? Because you need to be careful. You might get more than you bargained for. And Milarepa thought about it and thought of his mother. And as he did, horrific demons appeared, juggling with 35 severed heads and 35 severed hearts. He'd got what he'd asked for. He'd got on board this powerful deity, the demons and the death-dealing mantra. So, armed with this initiation, armed with this power, and having this connection with this evil Jar with the purple face, he went back to his village and contacted his mother. And just at that time, there was a wedding being held in the village. And the wedding was of the son of the aunt and the uncle. And they were having a big celebration, a big party in their old house, in the home that had been Milarepa's family home for generations, that they had stolen from them. And they were having a party right there in their house, all gathered under one roof. And Milarepa and his mother thought, this has been given to us by the evil magician. This is a perfect opportunity. So Milarepa went to his cave, high above the mountain, in the mountains, and he summoned the evil deity. And he concentrated his power and he chanted the death-dealing mantra. And the party was getting into full swing. The party was going really well, full of all the villagers. The villagers were all there. The aunt and uncle were all there. And as Milarepa started chanting the mantra, the house started to fill with creeping things. And what this reminded me of more recently is, I'm a Celebrity, when they put those horrible piles of insects into the houses. Scorpions, spiders, centipedes started filling the rooms, to the walls, to the ceiling, all of the furniture, terrifying the guests and terrifying the horses in the stable. And the horses started to kick at the walls supporting the roof. And the house shook. And a scorpion the size of a horse started stabbing the supports of the house. And the house began to collapse. And the house crushed the guests. And 35 people were killed at the hands of Milarepa. With their unbelievable knack for self-preservation, the aunt and the uncle got out. But they'd had their revenge. They'd had their revenge and killed their son. And they'd had their revenge on the villagers, but for Milarepa's mother, not quite enough. So Milarepa created a hailstorm that destroyed all the crops and caused even more death amongst the villagers. Milarepa and his mum were chased out of town, but they'd had their revenge satisfied. Milarepa had great power. He had potential wealth. He could name his price. He could have gone around the world with this incredible power. Want revenge on your enemies? Pay up and I'll let you have it. But that didn't happen. Milarepa was very, very troubled. He had had evil intention and he had done evil and he knew it. And he knew enough of the Dharma to know that terrible suffering was going to come for him. He felt very, very guilty about what he'd done. He felt terrible for the terrible harm he'd caused. And also he knew that he was going to suffer. We know from the Dhammapada that if we act unskillfully, suffering will follow like a shadow that never departs. And he knew suffering was coming. He knew that his next rebirth would be a terrible rebirth. And he knew that the rest of his life would be tormented with shame and guilt. He would be outcast. And he knew that his heart had been turned to stone. He was looking at a terrible future, and he was feeling terrified and desperate. He'd committed mass murder and wanted to change. He wanted to be different. He wanted to be good. So he left home. He left his mother, explained to his mother what he was doing. She didn't understand, wanted him to continue what he was doing and cause more suffering. But he left her. And he went in search of a teacher. And he knew who he wanted. Marpa, the translator, was the teacher he wanted. Marpa was a farmer and a family man. He was fierce. And he'd been to India twice in search of teachings. He'd been a homeless wanderer in India looking for a teacher that he wanted, Naropa, who was his teacher. He knew what it was to long for the Dharma. He knew what it was to be desperate to change. And he knew how Milarepa needed to practice. He took one look at him, heard his story, and said, "Great sorcerer, clean the kitchen." He knew immediately what he needed. Milarepa didn't get what he wanted, but he got what he needed. His idea that he was advanced and special had been recognized by his previous teacher. Surely he'd get an advanced practice straight away from Marpa. But Marpa could see that what he needed was something different. He needed humility and simplicity, not advanced teachings. He needed to admit that he was a complete mess and offer himself as a beginner. And for 6 years, Marpa said, I'm not teaching you. For 6 years, Milarepa had to do what Marpa said without getting a teaching of the Dharma. He carried on longing and being desperate for a Dharma teaching, and Milarepa wasn't going to give him. He had to act as a servant and forget his own desires. And all this time, he loved Marpa. All this time, all he could feel for Marpa was love and devotion and respect. But he never got a teaching. Instead, he got great sorcerer. He was told to build a tower over there, like this, exactly like this, over there. So he built the tower with stones, brick after brick. Get the stones from down there and build it there. So he did. It took him months. Eventually it was finished, and he said to Marpa, it's finished. And Marpa said, I didn't say build it there. I said build it over there. You've done it wrong. Do it again. So he did it again. And then he said, I've finished. And he said, I didn't want it facing that way. I wanted it facing that way. You've made a mistake. Do it again. And this carried on and on and on. And all the time, Milarepa's ego was just getting chipped away and chipped away. His specialness was getting chipped away and chipped away, going through the hardships. Now, nobody is suggesting that anybody should teach like this or be taught like this. This is a story, and it's coming from a very, very particular tradition. And Marpa was an enlightened teacher. This is a metaphor. We can take it as a metaphor. He refused to give him the great teaching. Instead, he gave him humility and hardship. But all the time, he secretly really admired him. And he could see that he was actually his spiritual son. He loved him, and he knew he was his son, and he knew the terrible burden that he carried. And he wanted more than anything to relieve him of that burden, but he couldn't. He just had to create the conditions for him to do it himself. But this went on, this tower building business went on and on and on for years, for about 12 years, we think? A long time, a really, really long time. And Marpa's wife was like watching him do it. It was like, oh my God, felt really sorry for him. And he said, she went to Milarepa and said, look, why don't you go and try that teacher over there in the next village? I'll write you a note. I'll write you a letter pretending to come from Marpa, saying that Marpa says you can go and have a teaching from there over there. So he says, yes, please, can I have that? So he gave him the letter, the forged letter, and went off to the other teacher. And the other teacher taught him Dharma. He was absolutely thrilled. He got the Dharma teaching. He taught him meditations. He taught him, simple Dharma, advanced Dharma. He taught him everything. But it wasn't making any difference. It wasn't making the slightest bit of difference. And the teacher was really surprised and wondered why. Why isn't it making a difference to you? Why are you not anymore? Why aren't you changing? You're not changing. You're not becoming any more humble. You're not any more generous. You're not any kinder. You don't seem any wiser. What on earth is going on? So he wrote to Marpa and said, why did you send him to me? Because I can't do anything with him. And Marpa's like, what? I didn't send him to you. How come he's with you? I thought he'd just run away. Apparently, no, he had. So then his teacher was really upset that he'd lied to him, and he sent him back to Marpa. Marpa said, all right, I'll teach you. So he sent him off into the mountains to meditate alone. He gave him his Dharma, and he sent him off into the mountain cave with no comfort, no clothes, all weathers, and every atom of Milarepa's being was behind what he was doing. Every atom of him was flowing in one direction. There was no conflict. He knew what he wanted, and he was completely committed now. He'd had a bit of a wobble, but now he knew. He'd been somewhere else. He'd been over there. He'd seen the different way of doing things, and it wasn't working. He was back with Marpa. Everything was flowing, completely committed, no matter what. And There is a traditional teaching that you can, it is possible to kind of burn off your karma. So if you've done something terrible in the past, or if you've had, it's a particular tradition that says that you can, by doing lots of positive, skillful things, you can kind of balance it out and eventually outweigh the terrible things you've done. So this is what Milarepa was doing. He knew that his unskillfulness was going to lead to suffering. So every ounce in his being was directed to skillful behavior, to skillful meditation, to kind of cancel out his negative karma of the past. And this was the period where he turned green, where he ate all the nettles. And all the time, a warm gratitude to Marpa. So he became a famous poet, singing his gratitude to Marpa. It broke him out of the patterns of ego that he was trapped in, made him, he discovered that all those years with Marpa were the conditions that he needed. And, 12 years in the cave, that's right. He was 12 years in the cave and became enlightened. And he left behind his terrible burden of evil deeds. And in his intense, skillful meditation, he turned his mind around, all the time thinking kindly about his teacher. And Milarepa became enlightened and had many, many disciples, taught many, many disciples, singing them his songs of Dharma, singing his songs of joy. And the Kaju lineage is the lineage of Milarepa, this amazing evil magician who turned and became enlightened in one lifetime. So how amazing is it that we can sit here and hear about the story